It was an ordinary day when everything changed. Jake, a scavenger on the forgotten world of Zarnus, had spent years sifting through wreckage left by the galaxy's many failed battles. His work was tedious, pulling valuable parts from old ships and technology to sell for a few credits. Life had been predictable until that day. Jake was working alone in a desolate canyon, digging through the remains of a massive alien vessel that had crash-landed. The hull was scorched, and the air smelled of burnt metal and fuel. He had seen this before. Another failed military ship, probably from one of the larger empires. He expected nothing more than scrap and parts that would fetch a decent price. But today, as his hands gripped a jagged piece of metal, he heard a faint sound, a soft moan. Curiosity piqued. Jake approached the sound carefully, his heart beginning to race. The wreckage was still dangerous, and something about this felt different. He moved the debris with his bare hands, uncovering what appeared to be a human body, or at least, what he thought was human. But she wasn't. A young alien woman lay unconscious on the ground. Her skin was a smooth shade of pale blue, almost purple in the dim light. Her features were delicate, and her small, elf-like ears twitched slightly in her sleep. She wore clothes that seemed far too elegant for the desolate environment, a luxurious fabric that shimmered faintly. She was breathing, but barely. Jake froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had no training in first aid, and he had never seen anything like her. His first instinct was to run. He had no idea if she was a threat. What if she was part of an alien army? But then he looked into her face. There was something vulnerable in her expression, something human-like, that made him hesitate. Against his better judgment, Jake knelt beside her, carefully touching her skin. It was warm. Too warm. She was alive, and if he didn't do something, she might not stay that way for long. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake whispered, not knowing if she could hear him. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing a stunning shade of green. She stared at him, confused and disoriented, as if she were seeing a ghost. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with great effort, she managed a soft, "Help." Jake's heart pounded. He had no idea what kind of trouble he might be in, but he couldn't leave her like this. He gently lifted her up, supporting her against his chest. She was light, fragile, and though he didn't understand why, he knew he had to get her somewhere safe. "You're going to be all right." He muttered more to himself than to her. He had no idea if he could really help her, but he would try. After all, how could he leave someone who seemed so lost? As he carried her away from the wreckage, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was the beginning of something far bigger than he ever could have imagined. A simple act of kindness, he thought, might just change everything. The journey to safety was longer than Jake had expected. He moved quickly, using the shadows of the canyon to hide from any passing patrols. The wreckage was far behind them now, but the nagging feeling that they were being watched never left him. The woman in his arms, though still unconscious, had a strange, calm presence about her. Despite everything, Jake couldn't shake the thought that she wasn't just another victim of the crash. There was something more about her. He made his way to a small abandoned structure he'd found years ago, a shack built into the side of a mountain that seemed untouched by time. It had once been a place for travelers, but now it was just a shelter he'd claimed as his own. He entered cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of danger before he set her down on a cot. She stirred as soon as he laid her down. Her eyes fluttered open again, and this time she looked around in confusion, her breath shallow. Jake stepped back, giving her space but watching closely. "Hey, you're safe here. I'll get you some water." Her gaze locked onto him, her eyes filled with questions. She didn't speak at first, as if trying to understand what was happening. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak but clear. Jake hesitated. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to talking to someone like her. But he couldn't exactly tell her he was a scavenger just trying to survive. "I'm Jake. I found you at the wreckage. You were hurt." The woman blinked slowly, taking in his words. She seemed to focus on his face, her expression softening slightly. I remember. You saved me. Her voice was laced with gratitude, but there was something else in her eyes. A sense of mystery. Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he went to get her some water from a nearby flask. When he returned, he handed it to her gently. She took it with a silent nod, sipping slowly. "Thank you," she murmured after a moment, her voice gaining strength. "But I need to know, who are you really?" Jake frowned, puzzled. "I'm just a guy. A scavenger. I didn't mean to get involved in anything big. I just saw someone who needed help, and I did what anyone would do." The woman studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his words carefully. Finally, she spoke, her voice tinged with a sense of authority that Jake hadn't noticed before. "You're not just anyone," she said, her gaze piercing. "You saved me, yes, but you have no idea who I am, do you?" Jake felt a sudden knot form in his stomach. Her tone was different now, less fragile, more knowing. "No, I don't," he replied honestly. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment before opening them again. "I am Princess Azara of the Glorious Empire. And you, Jake, have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into." Jake's heart raced. He stepped back, processing her words. The Glorious Empire. That was a name he had only heard whispered among the scavengers. The empire that controlled countless worlds, known for its wealth and power. Before he could respond, the woman, Princess Azara, fell back onto the cot, her strength waning again. She closed her eyes, clearly exhausted. "You saved my life, human. But you've just trapped yourself in a game much larger than you realize." Jake stood there, his mind spinning. He had saved the life of a princess. But now, the truth was sinking in. His decision to help her had just put him in the crosshairs of an entire empire, and he had no idea what kind of consequences awaited him next. Jake sat quietly in the corner of the shack, watching the princess as she slept. The weight of her words pressed on him, and his mind raced with questions. A princess of the Glorious Empire. He had no idea how to feel about it. Was it an honor? A curse? Either way, it didn't matter now. He had helped her, and now he was stuck with the consequences. As the hours passed, Jake stayed alert, trying to ignore the gnawing fear creeping into his thoughts. The world outside was still dangerous, and he knew he couldn't keep the princess hidden for long. The Glorious Empire wasn't the kind of force that just forgot about a missing royal. They'd come looking for her, and when they did, he'd be right in their sights. He wasn't wrong. The next morning, as Jake prepared some food, he heard it, distant engines growing louder. He froze. His pulse quickened. The sound was unmistakable. The hum of alien ships. They were close. He rushed over to the princess, shaking her gently. "Isara, wake up. We need to go. Now." She stirred, groggily opening her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her voice still weak from her injuries. "The Empire's coming," Jake said quickly. "They're looking for you." Her eyes shot open, now fully awake. The fear that had once been buried deep in her expression now surfaced, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Resolve. She sat up, ignoring the pain, and began pulling herself together. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice growing stronger. She glanced at Jake, her face hardening. "You should have known they would come for me. I'm not just anyone. The Empire doesn't let its royals disappear without consequences." Jake felt a twinge of anger. "I didn't know. I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to help." She didn't respond, only stood up and moved towards the door. She seemed to regain her composure quickly, like a switch had been flipped. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, almost as if speaking to herself. "You've trapped yourself in something you can't escape now. I'm not some helpless princess, Jake. I never was." Jake's frustration grew. Then why did you need me? Why'd you act like you were in danger? I was, she snapped, her voice sharp. But not the way you think. It wasn't my life I was trying to save. It was my freedom. Before Jake could ask what she meant, the sound of engines grew louder, much closer now. He looked through the window and saw it, a sleek, black ship descending rapidly toward the ground. The Glorief's mark was unmistakable, glowing faintly in the ship's design. There was no mistaking it. The pursuit had begun. They're here, Jake muttered under his breath. Sarah glanced at him. We can't stay here. We need to get to the caves. Follow me. Without waiting for him to respond, she dashed out the door. Jake hesitated for only a second before following. The shack was too vulnerable. There was no chance they could outrun the ships, but he knew their only hope was to escape into the nearby caves. He had no idea if they would be able to hide long enough, but it was the only chance they had. As they ran, the world around them seemed to blur. Jake's breath came faster, and his mind raced. He had thought saving the princess would be a good deed. Now he was part of something bigger than himself, something that threatened to swallow him whole. And yet, a part of him felt strangely connected to her, something beyond her title. They reached the entrance to the cave, just as the first of the enemy ships touched down. Jake's heart was pounding, his instincts screaming to keep moving. He had no idea what kind of future he had just walked into, but he was about to find out. The cave was cold and damp, but Jake didn't notice the chill. His mind was spinning, trying to keep up with the whirlwind of events. They had barely made it into the cave when the first blast of gunfire echoed outside, the sound of a ship's weapons tearing through the air. The enemy wasn't just here to capture Azara. They were here to destroy anything in their path. Azara led the way, her movements quick and decisive despite her earlier weakness. Jake followed close behind, feeling the weight of his own fear pressing down on him. He had no weapons, no plan, only the princess, who seemed to know exactly what to do, and him, who had no idea what came next. Keep moving, she said, her voice sharp as she glanced back at him. They'll come after us in the caves. We need to hide. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. He didn't understand what was happening, but he had no choice but to follow her. They passed through narrow, winding passages in the cave, the air growing colder the deeper they went. The sound of gunfire grew quieter, but it was still there, echoing off the walls like a distant storm. After what felt like hours, they came to a small, secluded chamber deep within the cave. It was dark, with only the faintest light filtering through cracks in the rock. Azara stopped and turned to Jake, her face set in a hard expression. This is where we'll wait, she said, her voice calm now, almost too calm. The Empire won't search too deep. They'll think we're hiding in the main tunnels. But we're not safe yet. Jake's mind was racing, trying to process everything she had said. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Why didn't you say anything about the Empire before? Azara didn't answer right away. She sat down on the cold stone floor, her eyes closing as if gathering her thoughts. I couldn't trust you, she said at last, her voice soft but firm. I didn't know if I could trust anyone. You were just a scavenger, someone who helped me out of kindness. I didn't expect you to get involved. And I didn't expect. She trailed off, and Jake could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What didn't you expect? He pressed. I didn't expect to care, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You saved my life. But now you're part of this. I never meant for you to get caught up in my war. Jake stepped closer, his frustration giving way to something softer. I don't care about your war. I didn't ask for this, but I'm in it now. And I'm not going to just sit here and wait for them to find us. Isara's eyes flicked up to meet his, and for the first time, Jake saw a glimmer of something different in her gaze. It wasn't cold calculation or royal distance. It was vulnerability. The kind of vulnerability that only came when someone was out of options. You're right, she said, standing up slowly. You didn't ask for this, but I'm sorry for dragging you into it." She paused, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I can't make promises, Jake. But if you stay with me, things will only get harder. The Empire will never stop hunting me." Jake didn't know what to say. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't even a fighter. But something about her words resonated with him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't just about a princess or an empire. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't ignore. "I'm not leaving," Jake said, his voice firm. "I don't know what's coming next, but I'll stick by you. Whatever happens, we deal with it together." Izara stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, she turned toward the cave entrance. "We're not safe here. We need to move again, but we must be smart. They'll be here soon, and when they find us, they won't show mercy." Jake's heart raced again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was determination. He didn't know how long they could keep running, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. The game was changing, and he was going to be a part of it, whether he liked it or not. The days in the cave dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Jake and Izara stayed hidden in the deep recesses of the cave, moving only when it was absolutely necessary. They lived off whatever food Jake had scavenged, and the cold, damp air of the cave seemed to seep into their bones. Despite the danger surrounding them, there were moments when Jake allowed himself to believe they might be safe. But deep down, he knew they were only buying time. Izara had become distant again, her thoughts clearly preoccupied. She spent most of her time pacing in the cave's dark corners, her mind clearly somewhere far away. Jake tried to keep his mind occupied as well, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something from him. One evening, after a particularly tense silence between them, Jake decided to break the quiet. He had to know more about who she was and why she had dragged him into this mess. "Izara," Jake began, his voice breaking through the stillness. "I've been thinking. You've been acting strange. I know you said the Empire won't stop hunting you, but there's more to it, isn't there? I saved you. I deserve to know what I'm really involved in." Izara didn't turn to him right away. She simply stared at the rock wall, her fingers gripping the edges of the cave as though holding herself together. Then, with a heavy sigh, she finally spoke. "I never wanted you to know," she said quietly. "The truth is, I wasn't in danger the way you think. You saved me, yes, but my life wasn't at risk. It was my freedom, my future. That's what I was trying to escape." Jake's eyebrows furrowed. Freedom? From what? She looked at him then, her eyes hard but also filled with an unmistakable sadness. "From a life that wasn't mine. I'm a princess, yes, but that means nothing when you're forced into a life you don't want. I was going to be married to someone I couldn't stand. Someone cruel. The Empire wanted me to be a pawn in their political games. Marrying me to a powerful warlord would secure their position, but it would have ruined my life." Jake took a step closer, his confusion deepening. "So, you staged the crash. You made it look like you were in danger." Izara nodded, her face tight with regret. "I had to. I knew the moment I was sent away that it was my only chance to escape, the only way I could break free. I didn't want your help, Jake. I didn't expect you to get involved." Jake's mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. "So you lied to me. You let me think you were in danger. You let me think I was saving your life when really, it was all a game to you." She looked down, ashamed. "I never meant for it to get this far. But I had no choice. I didn't know who else to trust, and I was running out of options. The Empire is ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. But I see now that I should have told you the truth." Jake felt his anger rising. "You should have. I risked everything for you. I thought I was helping someone in real danger. And now I find out you've been playing me all along." Izara reached out, her hand trembling. "Jake, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept you in the dark, you'd be safe. But I see now how wrong I was." Jake stepped back, his heart torn between betrayal and understanding. He wanted to be angry, wanted to walk away. But something in his chest stopped him. Something told him that, despite everything, there was more to her story. "We still need to figure out what to do," he said, his voice softer now, though the hurt was still there. "I'm not walking away from this. But if we're going to get out of here, we need a real plan." Isara looked at him, her expression one of quiet relief. "I promise, Jake, I'll tell you everything. And together, we'll figure out a way to escape the Empire. But you have to trust me. It's the only chance we have." Jake took a deep breath, trying to push past the anger. He didn't know what the future held, but for better or worse, he was in this now. He could either walk away and risk losing everything, or he could face the truth with her and fight back. "All right," he said, his resolve firming. "We'll do this together. No more secrets. I'm with you, whatever comes next." Isara nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. You don't know what this means." But Jake didn't have an answer. The road ahead was uncertain, and the danger was still very real. But for the first time since he had met her, he felt like they were finally standing on the same ground. And whatever truth still lay hidden, he was ready to face it. The days in the cave were starting to blur together, and Jake could feel the tension growing thicker with each passing hour. It had been a week since Isara revealed the truth about her escape from the Empire, and while Jake had agreed to stay and help her, a heavy weight still hung in the air. The more he learned, the more he realized just how deep her involvement in the Empire's politics really went. But now wasn't the time for questions. Now was the time to act. Isara had been quieter than usual, her focus narrowing as she spent her days planning. Her confidence, once shaken by the revelation, was now coming back in full force. Jake could see it in her eyes. She was preparing for something big. One evening, after their meager meal of dried rations, Isara finally spoke up. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice calm but serious. "It's time we stop running. We need to fight back. The Empire won't stop hunting me, and I won't be their pawn anymore." Jake looked up from the fire they had started, the flickering flames casting shadows across his face. "Fight back? Against the Empire?" He shook his head. "You're talking about going up against an entire galactic force. How?" Sarah leaned forward, her eyes burning with determination. "We start small. We don't take on the whole Empire just yet, but we make a statement. I know of a ship, an old rebel cruiser hidden on a nearby moon. It's not much, but it's enough to get us off this planet and send a message." Jake thought for a moment. "You have a plan to get it?" She nodded. "I do. But it's risky. We'll need to move quickly, and there's a good chance we'll be discovered before we even get close. But it's our best shot." Jake didn't like the sound of the risk, but what choice did they have? Staying in the cave was no longer an option, and if they kept running, they would be hunted forever. "All right," he said, standing up. "So, what's the plan?" Isara smiled slightly, a flicker of hope lighting up her face. "We'll need to wait for the Empire's next patrol. Once they leave, we'll slip past their perimeter. The cruiser is located in an abandoned base, one that the Empire doesn't know about anymore. We'll have a narrow window of time, but if we move quickly, we can reach it before anyone notices." Jake wasn't sure if he was ready for another dangerous mission. They had barely escaped the last one, and now they were planning to sneak into an old base to steal a ship. It sounded insane, but he understood why they had no other choice. "When do we leave?" he asked, his mind already racing with the details of what they would need. "We leave tomorrow night," she said. "Get some rest. We'll need all our strength for the journey ahead." Jake nodded, but as he lay back down on the cold ground, his thoughts were still filled with doubt. Was this really the right path? What if they didn't make it? What if the Empire was already on their tail, waiting to crush them both. But deep inside, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to turn his back on Azara. She may have lied to him in the past, but in the end, she was just as trapped in this war as he was. And if they had any chance of escaping, they needed to do it together. As the night passed, Jake closed his eyes, trying to push the fear from his mind. Tomorrow would be dangerous. It could be their last chance. But for the first time, he felt like they had a real shot at something. Freedom, survival, and maybe even a new beginning. He could only hope that Isara's plan would work. The night was darker than usual as Jake and Isara set out from the cave. The cool air bit at their skin as they moved swiftly through the narrow paths, keeping their steps quiet and measured. The plan was simple: sneak past the Empire's patrols, reach the abandoned base, and take the old rebel cruiser. It sounded almost too easy, but Jake had learned by now that nothing was easy in this new life he found himself in. Isara led the way, her movements sharp and focused. Despite the tension, she seemed confident. Jake, on the other hand, felt the weight of every shadow that passed over them. His mind raced, reminding him of all the ways this could go wrong. Still, he pushed his fears down. They had a job to do, and there was no turning back now. They reached the edge of the Empire's perimeter just as the moon reached its peak. The patrols had just shifted, and Jake could see the faint lights of the guards moving in the distance. They were getting closer to the old base. Just a few more miles, and they'd be inside. Jake's heart pounded as they crouched behind some rocks, waiting for the patrol to pass. It felt like hours before they finally moved again. Isara led them forward, each step taken with deliberate care. As they neared the base, the sound of their footsteps seemed louder than ever. They slipped through an old security gate, the rusted metal creaking as they pushed it open. Inside, the base was eerily quiet, but Jake could feel the presence of danger lurking. It was a place long abandoned, but it still held memories of battles fought and lost. Isara moved quickly, her eyes scanning the dark corners of the old base. Jake followed, trying to keep up, his breath shallow in the silence. They'd reached the hangar, and in the dim light, Jake could make out the outline of the cruiser. It was old, but it looked strong. They were almost there. He could feel a sense of relief building in him. But as they approached the ship, Isara suddenly stopped. Her body stiffened, and she turned to face Jake, her eyes cold. Jake's stomach dropped. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tense. Isara didn't answer right away. She stood there, her gaze hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm sorry, Jake," she said finally, her voice low, almost distant. "I never meant for you to get this far into my world. But it's over now." Jake blinked, confusion washing over him. "What are you talking about? We're so close. We can still escape, together." Isara's face tightened, and she stepped away from him, her expression now unreadable. "I never intended to bring you with me," she said coldly. "You were just a means to an end. I had to make sure you trusted me enough to help me. But now you've outlived your use." Jake took a step back, the betrayal hitting him harder than anything he had ever felt. "What? You?" Before he could say anything more, he heard the unmistakable sound of boots pounding against the ground. A group of Empire soldiers had arrived, their weapons raised and aimed at him. Isara turned, her face a mask of indifference. "You led them here." Jake's voice shook with disbelief. "You betrayed me." Isara's eyes flicked to him for only a moment, and then she turned back to the soldiers. "Take him," she said flatly. "He's no longer necessary." Jake's heart hammered in his chest as they moved to seize him. Anger, frustration, and a sense of complete betrayal rushed through him. All this time, he had thought they were allies. He had trusted her, cared for her, and this was how she repaid him. He had been nothing more than a pawn in her game. The soldiers advanced, and Jake knew there was no time to think. His hands moved instinctively, grabbing a nearby metal rod. As the first soldier lunged at him, Jake swung, knocking the man back. But there were too many. The fight was over before it even began. They overpowered him, pushing him to the ground. Izara stood by, watching, her face unreadable. The soldiers secured him, and one of them turned to her. "Are you sure, Princess?" the soldier asked. Izara nodded without a word, her eyes never leaving Jake. As they dragged him away, Jake's heart felt heavier than ever. He had thought they would escape together, but now he realized that everything, every step, every sacrifice, had been part of her plan from the beginning. She had used him, and now he was nothing more than a prisoner. Jake woke to the sound of metal clanking, the cold, sharp echo of chains around his wrists. His head was throbbing, and his body ached from the rough treatment. As his senses slowly returned, he realized he was in a dimly lit cell, the walls made of cold stone, the floor slick with dampness. The air was thick with the scent of metal and sweat. His hands were bound tightly to a chair, and his legs were shackled to the floor. The world spun for a moment, but then everything came back in a rush. Izara's betrayal, the soldiers dragging him away, and the hollow look in her eyes. She had used him. He had been nothing more than a tool in her escape. The anger and pain from her betrayal surged within him, but something else began to stir deep inside him. Something stronger than anger. Jake had never been the type to give up. No matter how tough things got, he always found a way to survive. This time, though, it wasn't just about survival. It was about justice, about standing up for what was right. Izara had manipulated him, yes, but he had been foolish to let his emotions blind him. It was time to take control again. The door to his cell creaked open, and Jake lifted his head, expecting more of the same. Guards, orders, more pain. But it wasn't a guard that stepped through the door. It was Izara. She stood there, her expression unreadable, her posture rigid. She wore the same cold, distant mask she had put on when the soldiers had captured him, but Jake could see the slight tremor in her hands. For the first time since their meeting, she didn't seem like the confident, calculating princess she had once been. There was something vulnerable in her gaze, a glimpse of the person she had tried so hard to hide. "You came to gloat?" Jake asked bitterly, his voice hoarse from the forced silence. "Is that it?" Izara didn't respond right away. She stepped forward, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to find something. An understanding, maybe, or an explanation. "I'm sorry," she said, the words coming out quieter than he expected. "I never wanted it to end like this. I didn't want to hurt you." Jake chuckled bitterly. "Then why did you betray me, Izara? Why play me like that? I risked everything for you. I trusted you, and you used me to get what you wanted." Her eyes flickered with something. Regret, maybe. But she didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood before him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You were never meant to be part of this," she said, her voice shaking now. "You were just supposed to help me get away. But I—" She paused, looking down. "I didn't expect to care about you. I didn't want to. I thought I could use you and move on. But now, I realize how wrong I was." Jake's heart clenched, a mix of anger and something else he couldn't place. He couldn't forgive her. Not yet. But there was something in her eyes, something real. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the person she had been pretending to be. "Why?" Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why the act? Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start?" Izara's eyes filled with pain. "Because I didn't trust anyone," she admitted softly. "Not even myself. I thought if I let someone in, they would have control over me. The Empire would control me. I didn't want to be trapped like that." She took a step closer, her voice pleading. "I thought I could do it alone, but I was wrong." Jake didn't know how to respond. His feelings were tangled. Betrayal, sympathy, confusion. The anger was still there, but so was something else, something that made him hesitate. He had come so far to help her, to trust her, and now, Now it was all unraveling. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "I just need you to understand. I never meant for you to be caught in this war. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if we can." Jake stared at her for a long moment, his thoughts racing. It would be so easy to stay angry, to turn his back on her completely. But he couldn't. He wasn't like that. He never had been. "You've already hurt me," Jake said, his voice steady now, his resolve building. "But you can't just walk away from everything now. We've both made mistakes. But if we're going to get out of this, if we're going to make it right, we need to work together." Azara looked at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with surprise. "You're willing to help me?" Jake nodded slowly. "I won't lie. This won't be easy. But we're in this together now, whether we like it or not. So let's fix this. Let's finish what we started." A flicker of hope appeared in her eyes. "Together?" she asked, almost like she didn't believe it. "Together," Jake confirmed. And for the first time, Azara allowed herself to smile. A small, uncertain smile, but a smile nonetheless. It wasn't a promise of easy days ahead, but it was something. It was a start. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Jake felt a strange sense of clarity. Despite the betrayal, despite everything that had happened, he couldn't help but feel that they might actually have a chance now. The Empire had them in their grip, but together, they could still escape. Together, they could find a way to fight back. Jake stood in the dark cell, his mind running through everything Azara had said. They both had made mistakes, but now they had to face the consequences and move forward. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving to themselves that they weren't just pawns in a game they didn't understand. They were people with their own lives, their own futures, and they weren't going to let the Empire take that from them. Azara had left the cell briefly, and Jake used the time to think, to gather his thoughts. He was still angry, but the anger had shifted into determination. This wasn't just about him or her. It was about fighting against a system that didn't care about anyone but itself. The Empire was powerful, yes, but no system was invincible. Even the biggest empire had cracks. When Azara returned, she wasn't alone. Behind her was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face scared but his eyes sharp. He wore the uniform of an Empire soldier, but his stance wasn't one of a loyal servant. He stood with the air of someone who had made their own choices, and Jake could tell by the way Azara looked at him that this man was more than just another soldier. "This is Rylos," Azara said, her voice steady but holding a note of urgency. "He's been part of the rebellion for years. He was one of the first to see the cracks in the Empire. He's here to help." Jake didn't trust easily, especially not after everything that had happened. But something about the way Rylos stood there, calm but with a certain intensity in his eyes, told Jake that he wasn't just a random ally. "You're sure he can be trusted?" Jake asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed on Azara. Rylos spoke before she could answer. "I know what it's like to be caught between the Empire's lies and the truth. The Empire doesn't care about people, it only cares about power. I've been fighting against it for years. And right now, I can offer you a way out, but you need to act quickly." Jake looked between Rylos and Azara, trying to read the situation. He could tell that Rylos wasn't lying. His voice, the way he held himself, everything about him spoke of someone who had seen too much and knew how to survive. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," Jake said, his voice firm. "But if you're really here to help, then show me. Show me how we get out of this alive." Rylos didn't flinch. "The first step is to get off this planet. The Empire has a stronghold here, but there are cracks. I have contacts, people who are already working against the Empire from the inside. We can get you out, but it won't be easy. The Empire will be hunting you both, especially you, Azara." Azara nodded, her expression determined. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes. I won't run anymore. I've spent my life being used as a pawn, but I'm done with that." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. He didn't know what they would face, and he didn't know if he was ready for what was to come. But for the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. Izara, despite everything, was still fighting alongside him. And with Rylos, they had a chance. A real chance. "All right," Jake said, his voice steady. "Let's do this. Let's get out of here." Rylos nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We leave tonight. Stay quiet, stay sharp, and we'll get you both to safety. But remember, this is just the beginning. The Empire won't let you go easily." Isara stepped forward, standing beside Jake. There was no turning back now. She had made her choice, and so had he. They were fighting for their lives, and together, they would find a way to win. The next chapter was just beginning, and this time, they would face it together. The night was colder than usual as Jake, Izara, and Rylos moved through the shadows, their footsteps soft against the cracked ground. They were on their way to the hidden rebel base that Rylos had promised would be their escape. Every step felt like it could be their last, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on them. But this was it, their only chance to leave the Empire's grip. Jake's mind was still racing. He had no idea what would happen once they reached the base, and he wasn't sure if trusting Rylos was the right call. But he had seen the determination in Izara's eyes, and that gave him some comfort. She was no longer the princess who had lied to him. She was a woman willing to fight for her freedom, just like him. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they reached the edge of the hidden base, Rylos signaled them to stop. He crouched low, scanning the area with sharp eyes. "Stay here," he whispered. "I'll check the perimeter first. We can't afford to be seen." Jake and Izara nodded, both crouching beside a large rock, waiting for Rylos to return. Jake's heart thudded in his chest as he watched the shadows, every movement seeming amplified in the silence. It felt as though the Empire's forces were always one step behind them, waiting to pounce. He had no idea how long they could keep running. "Are you sure this will work?" Jake asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Isara's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. A small, genuine smile. "I trust Rylos. He's one of the few who's always fought for what's right, even when it meant putting himself at risk. If anyone can get us out of here, it's him." Jake nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. "And what happens after we leave this planet? Where do we go?" "We don't know," she admitted softly. "But we'll figure it out. We have to." Jake didn't reply. He just watched the shadows, the uncertainty hanging between them like a heavy fog. He had promised to help Izara, to stay with her, but the more he thought about it, the more the risks seemed overwhelming. The Empire wasn't just going to let her go. They'd come for her, for both of them, with everything they had. Rylos returned a few minutes later, his face grim. "The coast is clear," he said quietly. "We can move." The three of them rose, slipping into the base's hidden entrance. Inside, the base was dark, only faint lights glowing from overhead. There were no guards, no sounds of life, just the eerie quiet of a place forgotten by time. Rylos led the way, his movements precise, until they reached a small room with a single shuttle parked inside. "This is it," Rylos said, gesturing toward the shuttle. "Once we're on this ship, there's no turning back. The Empire will know we've escaped, and they won't stop hunting us. The question is, are you ready for what comes next?" Jake and Izara exchanged a look. They both knew the answer, even if it was the hardest decision they had ever made. "We're ready," Izara said firmly, her voice steady. Jake nodded. "Let's go." As they climbed into the shuttle, the door closed behind them, sealing them off from the planet they had known. The engines hummed to life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to feel something other than fear. He wasn't sure what the future held, or what kind of life they would have once they left the Empire behind. But he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The shuttle lifted off, rising into the unknown, carrying them into a future filled with uncertainty, but also with the hope of a new beginning.